February 3rd, 1959, the day the music died. Rising stars with the brightest of futures. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Big Bopper Richardson, all with light years of potential, were tragically killed in a plane crash that almost certainly should never have taken off. So just what happened that fateful wintry night, and how did it change the projection of music forever? I'm Nostalgic Nick, here to revisit one of the saddest events in music history. One that if you were around, you certainly remember. And if you do, please give us all the details in the comments below, as this story, unlike any other, shows how life can change at the flip of a coin. Quite literally. If you enjoy our song, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so we can revisit these definitive moments of history together. And click the bell so you'll be notified when we drop new content. But without further ado, let's go back to that fateful February evening and see how nothing was ever the same. Pioneering rock and roll. The 1950s were a transformative time for music. Rhythm and blues, rockabilly, swing, and country were all flourishing, and the first bass drum beats of rock and roll were heard. Every genre had its champions pushing the boundaries with their unique perspective. And quite often, those strongest players in each genre would directly influence others, like the story of rock as a blend of gospel, country, and pop. And no one better exemplified this than Buddy Holly, who came from a very musical family and used the best from all styles. Holly had all the makings of a musical pioneer. He formed a band right out of high school and found an appropriate musical idol in Elvis Presley. Buddy Holly and the Crickets charted 7 times in 2 years.
That'll be the day when I die.
The day was theirs, and their tune, That'll Be the Day, hit the US charts 500 days before Buddy Holly boarded a plane in snowy weather for a trip that he would never finish. Fear and Fate. Ritchie Valens proved beyond a doubt that greatness comes with vision. La Bamba has its roots in the sprawling seaside state of Veracruz, Mexico. Ritchie's imagination turned it into a rock and roll smash hit, one of the most important in the budding genre. Like Holly, Valens had supportive parents. And good thing too, because he had his heart set on music since he was 5 years old. Sadly, Ritchie's dad died when he was 15. Right at the time of his funeral, the infamous 1957 Pacoima mid-air collision occurred, and it gave Ritchie Valens recurring nightmares as well as a fear of flying. If that harmed his musical prowess, it never showed, as Valens stood out for his uncanny ability to improvise in the middle of a performance, adding guitar riffs and even made up lyrics. That same passion drove Valens to compose Donna, about his girlfriend Donna Ludwig. His last hit single would be a real heartbreaker that every teen in love could sympathize with. And he managed to do all this before turning 18. The Big Bop.
Hello, baby.
Giles Perry Richardson, aka the Big Bopper. Now his entry into music was the least expected, having a background in football and law. You know, the usual. But JP also became a DJ, and his stage name came from when everyone was dancing the bop at college. And people quickly became familiar with his voice from his own radio show, and was no stranger to grueling schedules. That's how he broke the record for continuous on-the-air broadcasting. And oh so smoothly, he went from jockeying songs to playing his own. The Bopper corrected course from Beggar to a King with the sensational Chantilly Lace, which comfortably sat in the top 40 for 22 weeks. The new household name was able to take a break from KTRM radio for a new tour called the Winter Dance Party in 1959. The Tour from Hell. The Day the Music Died is a series of ill-fated stars lining up very horribly. It's kind of astounding and painful. Holly had just broken away from the Crickets, setting him up to join the Winter Dance Party tour as the headline act. It kicked off on January 23rd in Wisconsin. bouncing around Iowa and Minnesota. But there wasn't any clear pattern. Midwest winters are a force of nature, and this one was no different. That February, temperatures plummeted to 20 to almost 40 below zero. Whew, that's too cold. At least they could warm up on the bus though, right? Oh my god, no? The tour bus was a repurposed school bus without a heater. So this already decrepit vehicle took an extra beating from the frozen roads and snow flurries. Not to mention the tour route was not efficient. These things are not chosen on a whim, there should be logistical thought to it. But instead, Holly, Valens, the Bop, along with Dion and the Belmonts, Frankie Sardo, and Holly's bandmates, who you may also remember, being Waylon Jennings, Tommy Alsop, and Carl Bunch, all got school bussed around with no heat and unclean clothing. They might as well have been outside because cases of frostbite popped up on top of the flu. Needless to say, they were getting fed up. At one point, the bus totally stopped because it was frozen, and the tour from hell now had to go to Moorhead, Minnesota. At this point, Buddy Holly was through. Compared to the zigzag path they'd take on the bus, Buddy found a direct route, which would give him some time to spare, to spend it at a laundromat. So he booked a charter plane just for him and his band. Except the Bopper was sick with the flu and asked Waylon Jennings if he could fly instead. Waylon agreed, but when Holly found out, he said, quote, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." And to this, Jennings fatally joked, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Then Valens, in defiance of his deep fear of flying, asked Alsop for his seat. Richie's fate was decided by a coin flip. With his declaration of heads, he secured a ride and sealed his fate. At 28, the Big Bopper was the oldest of the three musical icons. Buddy Holly was 22, and Richie Valens was just 17 years old. Ingredients for disaster. The fourth person on that plane was the pilot, Roger Peterson. Also young, at just 21 years old, he married his high school sweetheart. The man was totally dedicated to flying, but he was also green around the gills, only certified as a limited flight instructor. That February, he was still working on instrument training, which takes us to that fateful night. There were flight advisories and blizzard warnings, but the weather briefings Peterson got didn't convey the full situation: snow and limited visibility. A pilot trained in instrument flying could manage it. Unfortunately, Peterson was not. The boys squeezed one more performance in on the second, which was supposed to be their day off. The Surf Ballroom wasn't on the original tour plan. After the show, some of the fans watched the trio board the plane, a 1947 Beechcraft Bonanza, which took off around 1 a.m., and everything started out okay. But the last sight witnesses had was the taillight falling and disappearing. It took just minutes for the plane to crash 8 miles away, killing everyone on board. After not hearing from Peterson, search parties went out the next day and found the aircraft covered in snow. Roger Peterson was the only one still in the plane. The other three had been thrown during the crash. Bad news on the doorstep. This tragic loss of life and talent gripped the nation several times over. Mention it today and older fans will tell you just how it felt when the news broke. And what did that accident take from us? What else were Holly, Valens, and Richardson going to do? They kept on inspiring even after death.
So bye, Miss American Pie.
In 1971, singer-songwriter Don McLean first belted out American Pie, the ultimate tribute to the fallen, to their place in rock history, and what a tragically perfect metaphor their demise was for the genre. McLean even gave us the name The Day the Music Died, a somber title for when the culture among American teens changed. But he says it took some time for the country to learn what they had lost, and it made him shiver. In retrospect, this was the teenage issues taking a back seat. But 13-year-old Don McLean took the loss personally, especially when the papers underplayed it. American Pie would not let those deaths be a footnote in musical history, and so the lyrics came to McLean all at once. All he could do was grab a recorder so he didn't lose anything. He proved their legacies would carry on, and helped immortalize Richardson, Holly, and Valens as symbols of rock itself. A song about innocence lost when innocent lives were cut short. And those kids the same age were the ones feeling it most. Family impact. At the time of his death, Buddy Holly was married to Maria Elena Santiago, whom he quietly married the year prior. Santiago was pregnant when those early reports came in about the crash, and terribly the next day she suffered a miscarriage, likely due to the trauma of it all, and she blamed herself for not joining him on the tour. If she'd gone, surely he wouldn't have boarded that plane. Guilt is a terrible co-pilot. Waylon Jennings was another who lived with the guilt of his pre-flight comment, swearing that for years he believed he doomed the flight. The crash also impacted policy. Authorities prohibited announcing victims' names until families were informed. And the Surf Ballroom now bears a 4-foot monument with the names of the 4 victims. It was unveiled in 1988 with the families in attendance, including Peterson's widow who remarried 10 years later. This was the first time that the families of Holly, Valens, and Richardson did finally meet. The day the music died is a tragedy that hurts like nothing else. They were icons for a part of America that felt ignored but would not be anymore. But it took McLean's anthem to give a name to the historic moment. That was the longest song to rank #1 until All Too Well by Taylor Swift rested atop the charts at 10 minutes long. Of course, we also have to wonder how these figures would interact with the musical landscape today. We can only speculate. But a common belief is that Valens would have helped elevate Spanish rock to greater prominence. Maybe Richardson would return to DJing, and Buddy Holly would be a bit of an everyman. Writing, singing, producing, he would do it all. So what do you think? What would their careers have looked like if they avoided that doomed flight and made it to the 1960s? Where were you when you learned of this terrible tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we read them all. And please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you'll catch our next trip down memory lane. But from all of us here at Do You Remember, thank you for watching and bye bye Miss American Pie.